We thought that we should start SF Climate Week with a panel of speakers who stand firmly opposed to the kind of abstract techno-solutionism that can appear at events where technologists and marketers hawk greenwashy solutions for mitigating climate change. Instead, the speakers today from different organizations will situate AI firmly in the local and social environmental impacts of data centers. We wanted to help bring awareness of these environmental justice and labor rights concerns to rank and file tech workers who may be worried about the carbon, water, and energy costs of LLMs, but not know where to start. Each speaker will give a 10-minute presentation on their work. Afterwards, we'll have about 15 minutes for Q&A, so feel free to add questions to the Q&A tab in the chat. At the end, TWC will talk about some ways that you can get involved. So first, we have Katherine Jin from New York City DSA Tech Action, who will provide a very brief overview of data centers to do some table setting before moving on to the various organizing projects that DSA is part of in New York State. Savannah Wilson from Clean Virginia will talk about policy regarding data centers and utility companies in Virginia. We'll then shift from local data center fights to AI applications in the larger supply chain, with former Microsoft workers Will and Holly Alpine from the Enabled Emissions campaign. Danny Cendejas from MediaJustice will cover data centers' relationship to surveillance and policing, as well as subsidies. Kim Harrison from Chip Workers for Responsible Mining will focus on tech worker advocacy around critical mineral extraction and human rights issues surrounding AI hardware. And finally, last but not least, Eliza Pan from Amazon Employees for Climate Justice will talk about how tech workers can change the narrative around responsible AI and data center development. So without further ado, Katherine, please take it away.
Hi, everyone. Just confirming that people can see my screen.
Yep, you're all good.
Great. So thanks everyone for attending today. My name is Katherine Jin, and I'm from the NYC DSA Tech Action Working Group. Basically, we're a working group located in New York City, centered around tech justice issues. One of the main issues we've been focusing on this year have been data centers, especially their construction and the environmental impact they have on local communities. So today, I'm here to run through a quick overview of data centers, as well as discuss what we're doing about data centers here in New York, how it impacts local communities, and what upcoming legislation or organizing efforts are supporting community efforts. So we're just going to go through this really quickly in 4 phases. The first will be, what are data centers and how they impact you? Second, how are communities pushing back with a specific focus on a stamped data center fight in upstate New York? What lawmakers are doing about it, and then what you can do to get involved, at least in the New York space. So let's just begin really quick with what data centers are to make sure we all start from a similar point of knowledge. So a data center is basically just a physical location where companies organize and store and process managed data. So for example, this morning, if you send a Slack message, send an email, use ChatGPT to write an email, every time you use the internet, you're basically accessing information that is stored in a data center. So these data centers usually have rows of server racks that contain thousands of computers, a cooling system to prevent the servers from heating up, kind of like the fans in your laptops. A facility also usually has a backup power supply. And then lastly, there's some advanced security to protect the hardware and data inside. So conventional data centers have been around for decades. So this is this image right here, rows of servers, cooling systems, etc. But generative AI and cryptocurrency consume way more energy. And that's because the data centers themselves are built differently. So on the right here, you see what an AI data center looks like. Compared to the more conventional one, it has to perform a lot more calculations. So compare when you write an email and hit send, the data center only has to receive that data. But when you ask AI to write your email for you, you're asking it to think, which in computing terms translates to performing more calculations. So this requires a completely different kind of chip, GPUs, which consume far more power and overheat extremely quickly. This means that in AI data centers with these GPUs close together, they get really hot, and therefore you need a cooling system, which ends up being water being pumped in and out of the data center daily. So the result is that data centers today, AI data centers, are built from more power-hungry chips in higher numbers with more energy and water-intensive cooling systems. So it's a really big power difference. So a traditional data center consumes around 50 terawatts of hour energy annually, but AI servers consume around 326. So that's a 600% increase in energy use. The big issue here is hyperscalers, which are basically mega data centers that can be like 2 to 15 football fields inside, and they host tens of thousands of server racks and are super energy intensive and water intensive. So this is just a map of the hyperscalers in America today. The US is already home to half of the world's hyperscalers. On the small end, a hyperscaler only needs 20 megawatts of power, but just for reference, 1 megawatt of power is enough to power between 700 and 1,000 homes. Some of these large hyperscalers can use up to 100 megawatts. So again, to give you a sense of scale, the width of this quarter is the energy you needed for your home. But a hyperscaler on the smaller end would require the power equivalent to the height of the Empire State Building. And that's just for a small hyperscaler. For a 100 megawatt hyperscaler, that's 5 Empire State Buildings. So there's tons of gigawatt hyperscalers being planned right now, and this energy consumption is only going to keep increasing exponentially. So what's the impact of all of this? One of the big ones is that we can't shut down fossil fuel plants as early as planned. We also need to often install diesel generators and to generate energy on site. So for example, with this case in Tennessee from XAI, they've bypassed the electric grid entirely by acquiring mobile natural gas plants. So even if a data center says they're using green energy, they're often using fossil fuels on site. And then these power requirements are so high that utility companies have to update transformers and power lines to support these facilities. And then this gets passed down to us in rate hikes. Some good examples are in New York, the data centers led to an extra $82 to $164 increase in electricity bills. Here in Virginia, which is what's shown on the screen, they're projecting a 276 per year rate hike by 2030. And these numbers are just going to keep getting worse. That's not all. Data centers also use a ton of water. The Washington Post found that a single ChatGPT generated email consumes around the equivalent of 1 16-ounce bottle. And then these companies often hide how much water they're using, and the amount of water they're using is often way more than disclosed. For example, Google in Oregon was using 3 times more water than they disclosed. And then lastly, these cooling systems are also a major source of noise pollution. Local communities complain about 24/7 constant hums. So there are a lot more effects that I haven't covered, but this is just a quick summary of the impact of data centers, what are data centers, and how they affect our environment. So that's just the overview, but now I'll jump into how this, at least we're fighting it in New York, and the legislative actions we're taking. So data centers are built often with very little public scrutiny. And this happens where communities see data centers built in their neighborhoods before, and that's when they find out. So the process of data centers, of building data centers, reveals a pattern that should concern us all. First, land is rezoned with minimal government oversight, and then these facilities often get fast-tracked through approval processes. For example, there are fast-track commercial incentive programs that sometimes can get a proposal through in just 6 weeks. Second, meaningful community engagement is notably absent. Public hearings, if they do happen, often happen after key decisions have been made. And then lastly, companies request big public subsidies by promising economic benefits that rarely materialize as advertised. So data centers are growing at an exponential rate. You're already seeing a 10-fold increase in just 5 years. And this is just going to mean more and more communities are going to face industrial development. So what does this mean for us? These maps illustrate the power demands and growth across different regions. In 2024, data centers already consumed 4.4% of all electricity demand in the US. But by 2028, they're projected to consume 12%, which is nearly triple the current usage. In New York State particularly, this is a big concern, given that we already have some of the highest energy costs in the nation, and have to import our energy from Canada and other states. And this is also coming from the highest levels of the government. Just this month, the Department of Energy said they were going to develop 16 new sites across the country for data center and AI infrastructure development, including a site here in New York. But local communities are starting to push back. These are headlines showing opposition in various regions. The pattern is clear. When people learn about the full scope of these projects and their potential impacts, many organize to oppose them. But right now, the approval processes are designed to minimize this input or address it only after the fundamental decision's been finalized. So I'll just really quickly run through a specific controversy here in New York itself. The Stamp Data Center, it's a huge 1,200-acre industrial facility located between Rochester and Buffalo. It's owned by the region's Industrial Development Agency, or IDA, which is basically a public benefit corporation, which wields significant power to approve tax breaks and subsidies with limited oversight. So they're planning on building the region's largest data center here. It's going to be a huge facility, cost $6.3 billion with $472 million in subsidies. It's going to require a massive amount of power, 250 megawatts continuously, plus a 600 megawatt substation. The daily water consumption is going to be 800,000 gallons, which is the equivalent of the water usage of 6,000 homes. There are 122 jobs created, but that's basically $4 million in subsidies per job. Moreover, these jobs that would be created don't rely on local expertise and would require people to move in to take these highly specialized jobs. They're also going to use discounted hydropower from the Niagara River. And this facility is going to be leased to a big tech company, which has yet to be named. So the local community has tons of issues with this coming from the Tonawanda Seneca Nation borders the current industrial park. And meanwhile, tons of residents also live in that area as well. So everything from environmental concerns to threats to tree protected rights to worrying about rising electric rates. In general, the community has really organized in opposition to the building of this data center. And just to add a little bit more detail, the construction activity already there has resulted in 2 separate hydraulic fracking fluid spills, and significantly, neither the nation nor the local community nor the relevant government agencies were notified about this. So it highlights the ongoing transparency issues. So despite the strong community opposition, the IDA unanimously approved the project this March. While disappointing, it's not that surprising. The IDA behaved extremely in bad faith throughout this entire process. First, they scheduled public hearings only on Mondays, so people couldn't come. Then at the hearings dedicated to the proposals, the project representatives didn't even show up. And then most egregiously, they withheld critical environmental impact information before public hearings meant specifically to discuss those concerns. For example, the Tonawanda Seneca Nation only received this impact report the day before the IDA approved the project. And then not surprisingly, the IDA itself stands to earn $47 to $79 million in fees from this deal. So overall, the case just illustrates a really urgent need for stronger oversight and regulation. And through this next act, which has been introduced by one of our socialists in office here in New York, the New York Sustainable Data Center Act, we're aiming to address some of those transparency and environmental responsibility issues. So this is a bill that we've been working on over the past year or so. It was reintroduced in March, but basically it would require resource usage, environmental impacts, consumer protections, all to be clearly disclosed, as well as prevent any backroom deals, which I'll kind of give more detail on in the next 2 slides. It's unlikely to pass this session, so we're still soliciting input. So if there's anybody who is interested in providing some kind of policy feedback on the current state of the bill, that's something we're still looking to work on. So basically, it would just require disclosure of a lot of information. It would require public hearings, and then it would require some level of annual reporting that includes fossil fuel consumption, renewable energy usage, water usage, et cetera. It would also require these data centers to move completely to renewable energies by 2030. And then there's also some consumer protections as well. For example, there's a ban on power purchase agreements. So these companies can't sign backroom deals with utility companies to get a better deal, as well as giving some level of community discount plan and some overview of how these discounts will be applied. So I know I ran through that all really quickly, but there are a couple ways to get involved if anyone's interested. And I can share this slide deck afterwards, but there are ways to get involved with the Tech Action Group itself, which includes research and policy analysis, comms and design, and coalition building. And then if there are any actions you want to take right now, if you live in New York, we're having a Halt the Hike rally against the Con Ed rate hikes, I think next Friday. And then you can also join our letter writing campaign to oppose the Stamp Data Center. Thank you very much.
Okay, so sorry that took a second to get up. Can everyone hear me all right? I'm gonna assume that means yeah.
Take it away.
Amazing. Okay, so my name is Savannah Wilson, and I'm a policy analyst at Clean Virginia, which is a nonprofit organization that advocates for electric utility repairs and an affordable energy transition in, as the name suggests, Virginia. So I'm going to be digging into the data center industry in Virginia. So I'm going to begin by giving an overview of what the data center industry looks like in Virginia, and then I'm going to dive into the way that Virginia's biggest electric utility has been interacting with and benefiting from the data center industry. Next, I'll spend a few minutes analyzing the results of those interactions and what they mean for Virginia's residents, and I'll close with a discussion of advocacy efforts for responsible data center development here. First, though, I'm going to make a quick note about a source that you're going to hear me referencing a lot in this presentation. So in December of last year, a state legislative research commission called JLARC published a report on Virginia's data center industry. This report explores what the industry looks like in Virginia and its effects, both positive and negative. The commission did a huge amount of work in creating the report, so it took them months of study and analysis, and they considered input from folks across a wide range of perspectives on data centers. The report definitely isn't perfect, and there are several conclusions and analyses that advocates have found are pretty problematic. What the report has provided is this sort of shared grounding point to start our conversations, for example, with the state legislature. And that's for a few reasons. First, the report gives us a lot of new calculations and analyses that are state-specific to Virginia and are really helpful to our efforts to understand the industry's effects. Usually we end up with analyses of one utility or of the whole nation, but not necessarily of Virginia, since we have multiple utilities and multiple electric cooperatives in the state. And then second, JLARC, so the legislative committee, is really trusted across our whole political spectrum in Virginia. So this means that when we go and cite information from the report, we know that our audience is likely going to agree that it comes from a trusted source. So with that introduction of this report that you're going to continue to hear about out of the way, I'm going to go and jump in to look at the data center industry in Virginia. So Virginia has the largest data center market in both the United States and the world by far. So the graph on this slide is from a report published last year, and it shows the world's top data center markets by energy demand. So Virginia is that big blue line right on the left. And as you can see, Virginia's market is more than 2 times the size of the next largest market in the whole world. And not only does Virginia have a huge number of data centers currently, its data center market is also projected to keep growing rapidly into the future. So as of a report published in 2023, Virginia led the United States, not just in current energy demand from data centers, but also in projected energy demand from planned data center projects. So we have a lot of data centers right now, but we also have a lot of data centers projected to come online in the future. So what do these rankings actually mean practically in Virginia? I'm going to discuss the implications of our future data center demand on a later slide, but Virginia's current data center status means that right now we have an estimated 340 data center buildings on 150 different sites, according to the JLARC report. And there are other sources that have estimated that that number of data centers in Virginia might be even higher. Historically, the data centers in Virginia have mostly been in the northern part of the state, but data center projects are now being proposed and built throughout the entire state of Virginia, including the Southwest region, where you don't really see much of those now. So Virginia is unique in that it has so many data centers, but data centers are now expanding throughout the US, and many other states look like they may be following Virginia's trajectory. So this means Virginia has been and continues to be on the front lines of these trends we're now seeing throughout the country. That means that what is happening in Virginia and what has happened in Virginia can give us good insight into what might happen elsewhere. And then before I move on to my next slide, I just want to note this other fun stat, as of late last year, Virginia's data centers used about 5 gigawatts of electricity. So Katherine talked a lot in her presentation about megawatts and sort of what that means. So gigawatt is 1,000 megawatts. And 5 gigawatts of electricity equals about the electricity demand of 60% of Virginia's households. And that's being used by just one industry. So as Katherine laid out, data centers have a pretty wide range of impacts, and they're affecting Virginia in many ways. So there are impacts around water use, transparency, noise and air pollution, and more. In this presentation, I'm just going to focus in really closely on one area of impact, which is their energy use. And that is going to bring us to Dominion Energy, which is Virginia's largest electric utility. Before I dive too deeply into this section, I just want to give a disclaimer that this slide is going to go into the very complicated and confusing world of utility regulations. So I've tried to give some really brief explanations here, but I would be very happy to answer any questions at the end to try to provide an explanation that's a little more in-depth. Utility regulation is different in every state. Every state has sort of a different setup and different rules. But the trends I'm about to be talking about here are things we've seen in some other states with data center demand. So the question here is, who profits from the build out of data centers in Virginia? The most obvious answer is obviously the tech companies that are responsible for them. These companies that are driving and profiting from data center expansion include the wealthiest tech companies and the wealthiest corporations in the world. So that includes not just direct tech companies, but also the companies sort of making the equipment that the data centers need. But they're not the only ones profiting. Another big benefactor in Virginia has been Dominion Energy. Dominion is Virginia's largest electric utility monopoly, and it provides power to about 2/3 of Virginia residents. These residents are generally Dominion customers because they live in the areas of the state served by Dominion. It's not because they chose Dominion as their electricity provider. In addition to these customers, Dominion's territory also includes much of Virginia's data center load. Dominion's official job is to provide electric service to its customers, but it's also a for-profit company that wants to earn money for its shareholders. Dominion is eligible to earn a profit that is equal to a certain percent of the money it spends on its capital investments. So that means that if it spends more money on these investments, it can earn more dollars of profit. This gives Dominion a natural incentive to want to build more big projects, like power stations or transmission lines, to maximize the profit for its shareholders. Thanks to their huge electricity demand, data centers create a need for such projects, which then creates an incentive for Dominion to want to have data centers. Dominion has a history of trying to attract data centers to its territory. So, for example, it historically has had pages on its website that aim to persuade data center developers to build there. So this picture right here on this slide is an image of a website from 2021. And this is a slide focusing in on some of the language from that webpage. It's not the whole language of the webpage, it's just one section. But the webpage here tells potential data center customers that Virginia is the ideal choice to support their growth, and that Dominion won't be just the electric utility, it will also be a true partner in growing your data center footprint. So this is a sort of marketing language Dominion used on its website to try to draw data center customers to its territory. This website is no longer available. Dominion has replaced it with more of a generic economic development page, but the company has nevertheless continued to express support for the data center industry's interests. For example, at a data center industry conference last fall, a Dominion executive encouraged data center companies to advocate for themselves and told the audience that we're fortunate to have the Data Center Coalition, which is a major data center lobbying group, because they're starting to carry the data center industry flag. Dominion has said that because it has to provide electric service to those who request it, it has no choice but to supply the enormous demands of its data center customers. But Dominion might also be partly responsible for this enormous demand, given this history we see of encouraging the data center industry to come to its territory and its history of championing the industry's interests. I'm now going to dig a little more into the implications of what this demand means for Virginians. As I noted earlier, future data center demand projections in Virginia are really significant. The JLERC report projected that data centers could almost triple Virginia's current electricity demand by 2040. In Dominion's territory specifically, the utility reported that it currently has 3.6 gigawatts of data center demand. It also has 40 gigawatts of capacity requests for future data center projects. Dominion's current total energy demand for all its customers is only about 20 gigawatts at its peak right now. So if all these capacity requests came to fruition, they would double Dominion's total energy load. Of course, data center demand might not end up being as high as the projection. There are a lot of different factors that make future data center demand unpredictable. But expected future demand is what shapes what Dominion builds. So even though it's not certain yet whether all of that demand will come online, Dominion can build as if it will. So what does this mean? The JLERC report found that it's going to be very difficult to meet potential future electric demand from data centers in Virginia if these predictions materialize. And that's even if new wind, solar, and gas resources are constructed at a breakneck pace. So this means an increased risk of there not being enough resources in Virginia to meet demand if these data center projects all come to fruition. And sort of regardless, these projections mean a huge future build out of energy infrastructure. So that's both infrastructure to produce energy like power plants and infrastructure to transport it like transmission lines, all capital intensive projects that again, Dominion can earn a profit on. So just as some examples, Dominion plans to build several new gas-fired power plants in the coming years, and it is calculated that data centers are the driver behind multiple gigawatts worth of this gas generation it wants to build. Similarly, it has billions of dollars in planned transmission projects to serve data centers. Obviously, all these projects come with a lot of costs. This infrastructure is very expensive. Dominion recently calculated that its projected data center demand will produce $22 billion in added costs over the next 15 years. These costs all give Dominion an opportunity to earn a lot of money for itself and for its shareholders. Meanwhile, the company's customers are the ones who ultimately pay for the cost of these investments. The question then is, which of Dominion's customers are going to pay these costs? It's one thing if the data centers pay their fair share, and it's another thing entirely if non-data center customers bear the costs that data centers put on the energy system. Katherine showed this image in the presentation earlier, but I'm going to bring it back up again. So the JLERC report predicted that the second scenario, where data centers aren't paying their fair share, could become the case. It projected that by 2030, data centers could increase the average bill of a Dominion customer who's a residential customer who's not a data center by $276 a year. And by 2040, that amount could climb to $444 a year. I do want to note that Dominion recently proposed some changes to its electric rates for large customers like data centers. These changes may decrease the risk of the company building load for data centers that never materialize. And Dominion also claims they will help protect non-data center customers from data center created costs. The extent to which that is actually true remains to be seen. Regardless, though, there are other costs associated with data centers that Virginia residents are still set to pay the costs of that Dominion has not proposed solutions for. For example, it is residents living near these gas plants who are going to suffer the health impacts of increased pollution from the gas plants Dominion plans to build. So now that I've spent a long time talking about the problem, I'm going to very briefly delve into what groups are doing to try to find solutions. And these are solutions to address both the energy-related problems and sort of the other issues that are attendant with data centers that I didn't have a chance to delve into. So this past state legislative session, an alliance of groups and legislators supported this package of bills that would have established 4 pillars for responsible data center growth. These bills focused on 1, ensuring fair distribution of costs. That's what I was talking about on the last slide. 2, increasing transparency around data center projects, because a lot of times data center projects are proposed and localities and citizens can't get information about what they actually are, who's running them, or how much energy or what they're going to use. The third pillar would be establishing statewide oversight of data center projects to make sure the state actually has the capacity to house these projects that are being proposed, because right now approval is entirely at the local level. And the fourth pillar would have added efficiency requirements to Virginia's data center tax exemption and told data centers they couldn't get a tax exemption unless they actually practiced efficiency and good environmental practices. So much of this legislation didn't make it through the legislature this year. Other bills made it through in modified form. But there are still some important takeaways from this process. First, there was support for reform across party lines. So the bills within these 4 pillars were sponsored by both Democrats and Republicans. This is held true in some other states too, such as Georgia. So there's a big opportunity in states of all political colors for this sort of reform effort to take place. And then second, advocacy and communication with legislators are both essential. In Virginia, data centers were not the only ones lobbying against legislation for responsible growth. Dominion also lobbied against some of these bills. And these companies that are lobbying against responsible data center growth tend to be wealthy and well-funded. That all means that if legislators are going to push back against their pressure, they need to know that reform is a top priority for them. Even just 10 to 15 constituents contacting their state legislature about an issue would be enough to make them start paying more attention. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Savannah. We're going to kick it over to Holly and Will Alpine.
All right, thanks. Can you hear me and see the screen?
Yep, take it away.
Great. All right, hey everyone, we're Holly and Will Alpine from the Enabled Emissions campaign. We're here to talk today about the concept of enabled emissions. It's a very related but distinct issue from data centers at the intersection of tech and climate. And for those wondering, we are married, we are not siblings, just to clear that up from the get-go. So the conversation in this webinar today is mostly around data centers. That's this physical manifestation of the cloud. But what is running in these data centers, and what is the technology being used to do? We're here to talk about how advanced technologies, including AI, are being developed and deployed deliberately to accelerate fossil fuel exploration and production, driving a significant rise in global carbon emissions. This tech is being created by the very institutions that claim sustainability leadership and are some of the top ESG companies in the world, yet a large portion of their business is making money helping the fossil fuel industry drill, baby, drill. And this is very alarming work and is largely going unaddressed by policymakers, by tech leaders, and even by many climate strategies. But who are we and why should you listen to us? Well, Will and I come from a combined 14 years at Microsoft and about 20 years in sustainability. And we really had dream jobs at Microsoft. I had my dream job on the cloud operations and innovation team. So I was on the data center team. I founded and was leading the community environmental sustainability program, which was investing in sustainability projects in those communities around the world that hosted Microsoft data centers, and really trying to ensure we had a good relationship in the community so that we could grow our data center footprint. So I don't envy my old team and what they're going through now with the work that the other folks on this call are doing. But I also co-founded Microsoft's employee engagement group. So grew that group to over 10,000 employees all over the company, trying to do good work and make sustainability part of everybody's job.
And hello, my name is Will. I'm a former product manager on the Microsoft AI Responsible AI team. So I've helped build the AI platform, so things powering things like ChatGPT and OpenAI. I was also a creator of the Green AI group at Microsoft. So in 2020, we were some of the first people to start warning that the energy consumption of AI was going to become a significant issue. And I also helped create a discipline called Green Software Engineering, and we defined methods to measure and reduce the carbon footprint of software and AI specifically. But we're standing here because we made the hardest decision of our lives. We left a company that we loved, a secure salary and amazing colleagues and really important work. And we've launched the Enabled Emissions campaign. And we are a coalition that is working to hold tech companies accountable for how their technology is used. And we're truly trying to align technology with climate science. And we are, to our knowledge, the only campaign in the world directly focusing on this issue. So what is this issue? What if I were to tell you that the most sophisticated actors are using AI to do the worst things? The applications of AI, how it's used, are doing far more to keep us hooked on fossil fuels than to get us off of them. And AI is being used in all parts of the fossil fuel industry to find and extract more oil and gas more cheaply, more efficiently, and more profitably. And this directly undermines all of the good work happening in the transition to clean energy. And so one example is that much of the low-hanging fruit, so to speak, has been plucked, and oil and gas companies resort to things like fracking and offshore drilling to stay competitive in the era of cheap renewable energy. And this is complex and it's risky and it requires lots of data to analyze subsurface data, reservoir modeling, simulation of new drilling, optimizing those operations. This happens at every single step of the oil and gas value chain. And big tech's really the secret weapon in this economic war between high and low carbon energy. And this is not just hypothetical. This is happening today. It has the potential to increase discoverable reserves by 5% and increase yield by 15%, and to do so 15% more profitably. But to put this another way, if you are in the orange juice business, you have access to 5% more oranges. Each one produces 15% more juice, and you can do so 15% more profitably. And we believe that this is going to fundamentally change the dynamics of the juice market, if you will.
At Microsoft, we saw billions of dollars worth of contracts with these companies in internal documents. But don't take it from us, take it from the companies themselves. These are quotes from public press releases co-published by Microsoft with Exxon and Chevron back in 2019, bragging about this work. They weren't shy about these lucrative partnerships. They were proud that they were drilling thousands of new wells, generating billions in cash flow, or boosting production by 50,000 barrels per day. All things that would not have been possible without this advanced technology. That's why we're calling it enabled emissions. And these quotes are with Microsoft, and they hold more contracts than all the other cloud providers combined for the fossil fuel industry. But we know it's not just Microsoft, and we know this needs to be a cross-industry initiative. And we wanted to compare some numbers. How big was this? What did that really mean? So we did the math, and we took Microsoft's own numbers from just 2 projects where they quantified the additional barrels of oil and calculated what that means in emissions, and found that just those 2 deals to be multiple times Microsoft's entire carbon footprint, including AI data centers. So this is a massive gap in our global climate strategy, and all sustainability work being done is being negated many times over. And we realize that no matter the climate progress we're seeing, it is being undermined by AI's unregulated role in supercharging fossil fuel expansion. And as I mentioned, those quotes were from 2019. And since 2020, many of the big tech companies' sustainability commitments came out, and big tech stopped really publicly bragging about their work with the oil and gas industry. But that does not mean that the work slowed down. In fact, it accelerated. And just last month at CERAWeek, the largest oil and gas conference in the world, the programming centered and revolved around AI and its ability to speed up drilling and make projects that were too difficult or expensive viable. This is terrifying to us. And we think that this quote sums up nicely what big tech is trying to build: a future of oil and gas exploration and production that is brighter than ever. Seeing this quote was actually the kind of the straw that broke the camel's back. We need a less violent metaphor there. But that made me decide that it was time to leave the company and start building something to oppose this. So the way that the debate around AI and climate is generally framed right now, what we hear every day in the media, is to compare the positive use cases of AI for sustainability, which there definitely are some great applications of AI for reducing emissions, and compare that against the impacts of its operations. But we believe this equation should be framed very differently, and it's missing a big variable. We believe the equation should be framed as looking at the net impacts of the applications. So look at both emissions decreases from the positive applications and emissions increases from these extractive applications, and look at the net impact of that, and then add to it the operations from the the emissions from the tech's operations. So without this variable around emissions increases from applications, the equation is incomplete and frankly dangerous. And, we have to be honest, and don't get us wrong, we do like using AI for certain applications. We actually used it to make some of these graphics. And as you can see, it still can't spell. But we just believe there should be reasonable guardrails in place for what tech is created and how it is used.
And so big tech has been throwing big oil a lifeline for a decade now, providing advanced technology to help them prop up their extractive business models. And in the era of generative AI, this issue has become supercharged. Yes, AI energy consumption has become an excuse to build out fossil fuel infrastructure, and that is a real concern. But AI is also fundamentally and structurally changing the fossil fuel industry and changing the supply and demand curve, how it's used. And there's some hope. We are in the era of cheap and abundant renewable energy, but AI is actually being used to widen that gap again between high and low carbon energy, and again, undermine all of the good decarbonization progress that's happening. And I must mention there's no regulatory or policy or impact framework that exists to really ensure that we get the outcomes that we want from AI. And what happens next is far from certain. And so we really can't just focus on one part of the data center or the tech issue. We all need to think about the systemic impacts resulting, especially from the harms of the use of the technology. Because what's happening inside of those data centers is less obvious, but potentially more harmful, and it's far less understood. So let's band together. Let's look at the full system so we can actually win this fight.
Thank you for your time. And these are our QR codes for our LinkedIn's if you want to connect with us, follow us, or just connect and let us know your thoughts and send us a message. Thanks so much. We're
Thank
at enabledemissions.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was, I think, a perfect transition to this next section where we're going to talk a little bit about the impacts of the way that data centers are, in my opinion, weaponized, right, against communities and to enact state violence. And so I'm going to, I'm not going to do that, but I'm going to share my screen. So hopefully folks are able to see my screen now. Thank you so much to Data and Society and the Tech Worker Coalition for the invitation, and to all the panelists and to everyone who is here today. It's really exciting to be part of this space. It's been cool to learn a lot so far, and I hope that my contributions can help all of us continue a great space of collective learning. So as I was saying, my name is Danny. I'm an organizer. My role at MediaJustice is campaign specialist. I am based on Piscataway land in Fairfax County, Virginia, where I also do local organizing with a group called La Colectiva and different coalitions, including one that's called For Us Not Amazon, where we have been taking on corporate influence in our communities and the harms that they create for multiple years now. I've been at MediaJustice for 3 years. And at MediaJustice, we organize and fight for racial and economic and gender justice in a digital age. I think all of us here today are aware of what communities across the country, not only here domestically, right, but internationally, are now grappling with the realities of the current administration, the rise of the tech oligarchy, and the collusion, right, between the state and corporations for decades and years, and to the tech industry in particular, that have led to the current political conditions that are harming so many of our folks, right? And it's not, unfortunately, a surprising reality that we face now, but it is important that these discussions around technology, around the data center expansion, which, to be clear, has been, both parties have been enacting this project for years. And now it is under the control of a fascist government. It is extremely important to think about how these data centers and this infrastructure is being used, right, by the state and, again, corporations. And I think about Bell Hooks's framework of articulating our system, right, which is a white supremacist capitalist patriarchy. And we know that with somebody like Trump in office, that and in partnership with tech corporations that have already a long trajectory of state violence, we can assume that that'll be escalated at a hyper speed, right? So with that being said, I'm gonna shift a little bit to actually getting into my part of the presentation. And my first part is maybe who remembers these, right? I am gonna start sharing a little bit about my personal experience with technology and the internet, and a little bit about our work. And I'm going to try to weave different pieces of the way that we as MediaJustice approach our work, right? Because as it's in our name, it's about media, it's about technology, right? And it's also about connectivity, right? So internet, for example, is a big piece of that, right? And when I think data centers, this is what I think about, right? And for me, this was my first attempt to try to connect. I failed many times with all of these disks that we would get in the mail lots of times, where I'd find them, right, and try to install them. And unfortunately, I was one of the kids that got internet very late, right? So I got it 10th grade, sophomore year of high school, because finally at that grade, at the school that I went to at the time, the teachers told my family and me that we had to get internet for research. And so we had to pay, right? And this is like one part of what I've noticed around internet, right, over years, my personal experience. And then, as I've been organizing for over 10 years now. My first few years in organizing were in Texas, in Dallas County, primarily in Black and Brown communities. And that's where I started hearing the term the digital divide a lot, right? And then I moved back to Virginia some time ago, and I've been organizing in Arlington County, right next to DC, for a few years now. And same thing, like the county talks about the digital divide all the time, right? And then we all know what happened in 2020, right, with the pandemic, COVID, and like the very, very real, like exposing this country, right, for the realities of the lack of connection that so many people, and in particular kids in this time, were dealing with, right? And so again, that question about like, where is all this internet, right? There's so much supposed investment from these corporations, from government, the state, right, that claims to be investing in expanding internet. But what I do know is that I all the time can see that the local police department has the newest technology, right? That they keep, having procurement processes to have contracts with different companies to expand all types of surveillance, right? What I do know is that the military keeps getting all sorts of new tech weapons, right, at their disposal. And all that also, like the latest example is something that I think as well that's connected to this, is a project that a few coworkers at MediaJustice did in April of last year, where they listened to folks in Utica, Mississippi, and about the lack of connectivity there, right? And I encourage folks to look this up on YouTube. It's a very powerful project, right? That just like details, what's up, what communities are facing, in particular in this example, rural communities, right? Black rural communities that have been fighting for connectivity for a long time. And so all that leads me to just take like the next question, right? Which is like, if people and communities aren't connected, where's all the bandwidth going, right? Like, I'm an abolitionist. I'm not sure if everybody on the call is. If you aren't, I invite you to join us. So I kind of try to think about things as I learn from folks like Miriam Kava and others, right? About like, hey, there is enough out here for us, right? We can see things in the lens of abundance. And I think that means also with, the infrastructure for internet and connectivity, right? So if it's not going to our communities, where is it going, right? And so one question I have, I know folks are, like I can't see the chat, but there is a Q&A function, right? But like, maybe if you see this map, you can ask yourself, what is this map, right? All of these little spots here require internet. I'm seeing some comments about, yes, there definitely is a funding piece, and we'll come back to that. And I'm not gonna, I won't have all the information, right? But there's definitely funding pieces that are tied to this, right? And so this map here shows a map of ring police partnerships all across the country, right? And so just revealing that here, that's what this map is. And thanks to Fight for the Future for this information. This next image, excuse me, gives some information about what is being hosted in these data centers, right? So organizations like Just Futures Law, Surveillance Resistance Lab, and Mi Gente release reports like Heart Attack, showing the way that ICE DHS is creating a huge database, right, of biometrics to supercharge surveillance and deportation. And where does that exist, right? It's not just some imaginary place. It is being stored in these data centers, right? I also note right here a couple of other examples of straight up advertisements from AWS, right? The future of policing is in the cloud. Are you, right? This is literally their propaganda, right? And then a few years ago, it was also covered that Amazon actually has direct ties through ownership of one of ICE's deportation airlines, right? And over years, migrant rights organizers have been fighting to, push for local protections through policies to stop information sharing and collaboration between police departments at the local level and ICE. And unfortunately, even though there have been a lot of powerful wins, there have been ways that the police and ICE continue to circumvent all of that progress, buying people's personal data, right, through data brokers that is extracted, through things like our electric, phone bills, geolocation, water, gas bills, internet. And so all that information, then credit reporting agencies aggregate that and make it available to other private companies that then make it available to purchase, right, for agencies like ICE, which then is a lot of information that gets used to go do raids, right? And then on the right out, there's also this image from Mi Gente about who's behind ICE, just giving the different imagery of the ties of these corporations and, the so-called cloud, the data centers, right? And all that infrastructure that exists to keep up the violence that ICE is enacting. Also is the work that No Tech for Apartheid organizers and tech workers who have been fighting for ending the ties between Amazon and Google, right? And Project Nimbus and other ties to Israeli military and the genocide that's happening, right? So that's the other part of the cloud, right? That we also need to consider, right? So whenever I think about things, I also want to share this recent this recent piece that came out a couple of days ago, right? So Google workers continue to organize and expose what the infrastructure of the data centers and the cloud are being used for, right? And so all of this is important for us to consider, because it is, I really like the environmental justice angle of the data center fights is super powerful. They're using dirty energy. They're making our communities dirty. And to me, part of a question that comes to mind is this is also dirty data that they're stealing from our communities and they're using for violent means, right? And so how can we make those connections across the organizing efforts as well? And I just wanted to share a local example, right, of how this shows up in our organizing community here locally. Police departments actively sharing data and actively collaborating with ICE to detain our community members and send them to ICE prisons and deportation, right? And this is happening in Arlington County without any agreements that exist, like documents between agencies. It is simply happening through data sharing that they are actively doing. And the last thing that I wanted to add, I might not answer Greg's question correctly or adequately, but one thing that is connected to funds, right, is that a lot of these data centers, right, are subsidized, well, majority, right? So this is from Good Jobs First. All of this public infrastructure, all of this infrastructure is publicly funded, excuse me. And so these subsidies are millions and millions of dollars. And so in the bottom right, this is actually in Northern Virginia, the Amazon HQ2 subsidy package that I wanted to note, because then on the left is a bunch of subsidies that are included for data centers, including in 2023, $140 million more to what they have gotten already, right? And I think about this, the connection to the way that data centers have become part of the infrastructure for state violence. And a friend, Jessica, who was at Acre in the past, showed me, taught me this framework of these subsidies are also part of the budget for policing then, right? And for state violence. And so I think that's another way that we can also make connections across issues, that the funding is the public's, is the people's. And it takes me back to just the part of the connectivity, right? The cloud, it is physical. And if we are able to have, people power, people control, and self-determination about how our bandwidth and how our infrastructure is used, instead of being used for state violence, we could advance, everybody could be connected. We could have technologies that are for good instead of for harm. And, I think that's what we hope that everybody can join us in the fight for. And lastly, I just wanted to share an opportunity to keep learning about data centers. MediaJustice has been hosting a bi-weekly political education series, and there's going to be an event next week, April 30th, that is in partnership with Kairos. So folks can register for that teaching next Wednesday at 6 p.m. Eastern. And yeah, I think I'll leave it there. If there are any questions, please drop them in. I think we'll come back to that. Thank you.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Kim Harrison, and I founded Chip Workers for Responsible Mining. So I wanted to maybe dive into the supply chain behind the hardware that you might find in data centers. So a little about me, I have a background in mechanical engineering with 15 years of experience in the semiconductor industry. So my role is that I design micro electromechanical systems, or MEMS, microstructures that could be sensors, could be found in a phone or a medical device, or actuators like ultrasonic actuators might be in an ultrasound sensor. So that's a picture of me on the right in a clean room holding a cassette of wafers. That's what I do as my day job. Besides that, I am also trying to advocate for mining communities within the semiconductor supply chain. So I'm a leader of the Responsible Supply Chain Working Group in the Semi Industry Association. And I founded Chip Workers for Responsible Mining to try to activate chip workers to advocate within their companies. So my primary interest here is in critical minerals and human rights. So I bring a little bit of a different dimension here, and just to kind of set a context, it's like asking the tractor operator at an industrial grain farm about the harm of the fast food industry. Like, they're connected, but I'm kind of upstream of where most people think. But I still think there are some interesting points to be considered. So let's look at the supply chain, right? We can start with the data centers that's owned by maybe Google, Amazon, or Microsoft, these large sprawling facilities that is where all of the AI and software gets run, right? So what is in those? Where does the hardware come from? So the data center itself has racks and racks of servers, right? And these might be made by Dell, HP, IBM, Supermicro, Huawei, or Cisco, right? So that's the image on the bottom. And then inside of those servers are chips, which might be made by NVIDIA, AMD, Intel, Amazon. So these are the GPUs that run the programs, right? And these chips could also be in your personal computers, but server farms utilize these as well. And then inside of those chips are silicon, right? So so the wafer that I'm showing on the left is like a bare silicon wafer. This image is from TSMC, or Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Corporation. They are the giant in the industry. TSMC makes the vast majority of GPUs in the world. But then you also have the Intels, the Samsungs. These are the foundries, right, that make the bare silicon. And this is where I work. That's what I make. That's maybe not specifically that wafer, but that's the sort of material that I work with. So in order to make those wafers, you need raw materials. So there's the materials come from smelters, refiners, mainly located in China. And they are fed materials from mining companies and commodity traders. So for instance, Glencore, Rio Tinto, China Molybdenum, and others. These are like the places that own the mines themselves. And at the very base of all of this are the mining communities, right? So this is, I'm showing an image here of children working in a cobalt washing facility. It's not even a facility, it's just an open water pit, right? And that's cobalt that they're washing there. So mining communities, it can include the Democratic Republic of the Congo, which I think a lot of people have probably heard about by now. This image comes from Siddharth Kara's book, Cobalt Red, which is a great intro to the topic, but also Chile, lithium, Indonesia, copper, Ukraine, Haiti, Panama, even in the US. We have these mineral resources that are often points of exploitation that usually affect the most vulnerable communities, right? And for instance, I'm showing here an image of the effects of mining on local environments near the world's largest cobalt mines in the DRC, or the Democratic Republic of the Congo. So you can see that there are a lot of adverse effects to living and working near these mines. Reduced fish and crop yield, 99% of people affected, but also reproductive issues, reduced schooling for children, skin and dermatological problems. A lot of these minerals are toxic just by themselves. Cobalt is toxic. So when you see people who are knee deep in these open water pits, like that is an extreme example of just the worst conditions that you can put a human being in. It's really awful. And it's surprisingly pervasive. And the environment itself is extremely important, especially, and I'm focusing on the Congo here. For instance, the Congo holds the world's largest tropical peatland complex, which sequesters carbon, and it's considered the second lung of the world, the Congo Basin. So not only are we creating these technologies that use a lot of energy and resources, but we're also destroying some of the most important ecosystems in the world in the process, which is very counterintuitive, when you think about the green energy revolution. And to be clear, like, a lot of cobalt is used to make lithium ion batteries. So when we say, oh, lithium ion batteries, that's a green technology, it's really not at the base of it. And I also want to go upstream, or sorry, not upstream, downstream of the data centers to think about what happens to the hardware afterwards, right? So these data centers, as Katherine mentioned, they host server racks, but also batteries for backup energy systems and other hardware. And I know a lot of companies like to talk about recycling. Oh, we're going to recycle these materials. I visited a lithium ion battery recycling center near Reno, Nevada, called Redwood Materials. It was co-founded by the ex-CTO of Tesla, J.B. Straubel. And that is what you're seeing here is a picture I took of just their open air pit of lithium ion batteries. And these battery recycling centers themselves are kind of ticking time bombs. Within the past year or so, several of these battery centers have had serious incidents where the batteries catch fire, they release toxic chemicals into the air, into the water. So Moss Landing near Monterey, California, Frederickstown in Missouri. There was a place near Atlanta. all within the past few months, had these major incidents that are affecting the local communities, right? So recycling batteries itself is a really dangerous process, and can have really wide-ranging effects when they go wrong. So in terms of what I'm focused on, which is the human rights advocacy part of it, and I'm thinking of, okay, the harm that's being done to the mining communities themselves is directly inflicted on them by mostly the mining companies, right? These are the bad acts that are happening. The regulations that we tend to see put in place by governments mostly affect the chip makers and the server manufacturers. And then the money that's being made in this chain is mainly concentrated in those who own the data centers, right? The Googles, the Amazons, and the Microsofts. So, from my perspective, it seems like, we have policies that are trying to address the problem, but they're often not directed at the people that actually need to be regulated. But there are efforts being made. And I can't go forward without emphasizing here, Glencore is evil. They are the largest commodity trader in the world, one of the largest companies in the world. They're linked to all sorts of problems, not just in terms of the Congo, but also emissions issues, bribery and corruption, geopolitical tensions. They've got their hands in a lot of really nasty things. So if you get anything out of this, if you see Glencore, their name in the news, pay attention, because they're usually up to no good. Okay, so supply chain. Companies in the semiconductor industry are trying to address this issue through various industry associations. So Responsible Business Alliance, International Tin Association, the Global Battery Alliance. These are all companies getting together to say, okay, what can we do? At least that's what they want you to think. A lot of times it's like, how can we get out of being held responsible? It's a really complicated web of who's working on what, but in the ideal sense, it's supposed to be that these organizations connect with workers and grassroots advocacy organizations on the ground, and then try to influence decision makers towards more sustainable practices. What often happens is that the corruption just kind of flows down and there's no accountability. So for instance, the Responsible Minerals Initiative, that is like the one group that almost every company uses in order to trace their supply chains. So if you look at any company's ESG policy, you'll probably see the Responsible Minerals Initiative in there somewhere. They are a member of the Global Business Alliance. So, they're a member now of another group, and who's on the board of that? Glencore. So it's a very sort of overlapping web of responsibility, where in the end, no one is responsible. So what I'm hoping to do through Chip Workers for Responsible Mining is to activate workers in the semiconductor and the tech industry to approach their companies about their policies, their supply chain, in a way that can affect change. So most hardware companies have some sort of ESG approach, which involves a due diligence standard. The one that most use is the OECD due diligence standard, which I have pictured on the right. There's a bunch of principles that they're supposed to follow, but it usually includes some sort of auditing program and tracing program and a grievance mechanism. And that last one is important, every company has some sort of public grievance mechanism where you can submit a report or some sort of issue that they're supposed to follow up on. So in order to figure out, okay, what should I say in that? I have on my website a video primer for how you can research your company's supply chain and ESG policies, and then what you can say in those grievance portals. And I have some other references down at the bottom also. But it's mostly targeting like tech workers who are in the industry and trying to work within their companies. Another thing that I just want to raise awareness of is there are due diligence directives that various countries or coalitions of countries try to enact. The one that I think most in the field are hoping will make a difference is the EU Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, or the CSDDD, which is making a standard for ESG principles across the EU. And it's supposed to force companies to address human rights and environmental impacts throughout their supply chain. So not just the first few tiers of suppliers, but the whole chain. It was adopted by the European Union last year, and it's supposed to get rolled out in 2027. And it includes, most importantly, guidance for enforcement. So injunctive orders, sanctions, and penalties for companies who do not follow through on this directive. And as you might imagine, there's already attacks on this, especially by the US. So several US legislators wrote a letter in February of this year urging diplomatic engagement to challenge and halt its implementation. And then the US Protect Act of 2025, which was introduced by Senator Haggerty, would require US companies to ignore any foreign ESG regulations. So that would be a big blow to advocates, globally who are trying to make a change. So you can find more information about the CSDDD, but one thing to note is that this is based on some UN level legally binding instruments that could be coming down the pipe. So not just the EU, but if this directive is successful, then it could lead to a more global directive that is implemented by the UN. So this is sort of the front of the battle that in the larger war that I think is one of the most important right now. Okay, so, and then I'll just end by saying, what a lot of people ask, well, what changes do we want to see? What is the solution? And the thing is that every area, every mining community needs a slightly different solution. It depends on the location, the mineral usage, et cetera. There are no monoliths. So although this makes things more complicated, it is important to recognize that different communities need different things. But in general, traceability is not a solution. By this, not that is not enough. We want direct relationships between downstream and upstream companies and communities, and equitable compensation and self-determination for mining communities. I'll give a shout out to Fair Work, which is a group based out of Oxford that's trying to do auditing of companies along these lines. And then we want support and recognition for higher level processing and technology near the mining communities so that these communities can own more of their own supply chain. Okay. And that's it from me. So any questions, please drop them in the Q&A.
Thank you. That was such a great presentation, and a really good transition to what I'm going to talk about. Hi everyone, I'm Eliza. I'm with Amazon Employees for Climate Justice, and what we do is we organize workers at Amazon to hold the company accountable and to pressure the company specifically to make changes. So kind of the next piece of what Kim was talking about. So So thank you to all the panelists for, really clearly talking and showing the environmental harms that big tech and mining companies are perpetuating in service of developing data centers and using and enabling more fossil fuels, the local community harms, the human rights violations, the surveillance and militarization. And I'm the last panelist for today. I know we're running short on time, but just so folks know, I'll be the last one here. Hopefully folks can stay on a little bit. What I want to talk about is what we can do about it, do about all of these harms that all the panelists have done such a great job of explaining, what we can do about it, especially in this time that we're in, which is a time of crisis. We're in a time of the climate crisis, we're in a time of the inequality crisis, and we're in a democracy crisis also. And all of this happening at the same time when the AI hype train and AI growth is rapidly accelerating and deepening these crises. So I'm going to just start with a short intro of my group and the work that we do. So let's see if I can do, okay, hang on a sec, sorry, it's just trying to pull up this deck here. Oops, 1 second. Okay. I can share, right? Nope. This one.
Yeah, you should be able to share.
Okay. Okay. It looks like maybe I'm not able to. That's okay. I'll just talk about it. So my group is Amazon Employees for Climate Justice. Our story begins in 2018. And essentially, at the time, there was really kind of a global awakening around climate issues, but Amazon hadn't done anything about releasing any kind of information about its sustainability or carbon footprint. And a few of us, including myself, I was working at Amazon at the time, we were really concerned about that, of why does Amazon not have any public information about what it was doing around climate? And so a few of us, including myself, really tried the internal channels. We tried writing papers, which is the kind of the accepted way to do things at Amazon when you want to get something done. We wrote papers, we talked to a lot of people across different teams and tried to get Amazon to say, hey, we're going to track our carbon footprint. And we hit brick wall after brick wall after brick wall. And so eventually what we decided is that we needed to make this a public fight. And so we filed a shareholder resolution and organized an open letter to Jeff Bezos and the Amazon board of directors. We eventually got over 8,000 Amazon employees to sign our names publicly, and it called on Jeff Bezos and the board of directors on a lot of different demands, not just transparency, but including an end to contracts with oil and gas companies, and also an end to the exploitation and pollution that Amazon warehouses were having at the time. And I'll talk later about the parallels between Amazon's warehouses and the data center development that's happening now. And we disrupted Amazon's annual shareholder meeting. And some of you might know the annual shareholder meeting is normally a very boring event with a lot of men in suits. And what we did is we organized about 70 of us. We all showed up wearing the same thing. And we had a speech during the event where we asked Jeff Bezos to come out on stage. And we asked people in the room to stand with us if they agreed with what we were demanding. It was a very emotional speech. By the end of it, one of my coworkers at the time, she gave the speech. And by the end of it, a lot of the people in the room were standing up. And that still didn't lead to enough change from Amazon, although they did make a concession. Amazon agreed to shipment zero, which was Amazon's first ever commitment to reduce shipping emissions in the company. And literally the day after they announced that publicly, they came back to us and said, hey, will you withdraw your shareholder resolution now? Will you basically end your efforts? And we said no, because that was not what we asked for. We asked for a company-wide commitment, and we had a lot of other demands as well. And so we knew that the pressure that we had been building was working. And so but we knew it wasn't enough. And so we started organizing a walkout. And we eventually organized over 3,000 workers to walk out all over the world, obviously the biggest being in Seattle, where I'm based, where Amazon headquarters are. But we had workers walk out all over the world, from in the US to Europe to South Africa. And it was truly it was truly a very powerful, maybe one of the most powerful experiences of my life. And literally 24 hours before our walkout, Jeff Bezos held a press conference and announced Amazon's climate pledge. And so we knew, right? I wish I had my slides so I could show you these photos of the power that happens when people come together and act collectively. And we knew that it was a result of our organizing for the past many months. And another reason we knew is actually a few months after that, Amazon threatened to fire some of our worker leaders who had led that walkout. And what we did in response is we organized over 400 workers to break the same policy that Amazon was accusing our worker leaders of breaking. And eventually, Amazon actually did illegally fire our worker leaders, but we won a case with the National Labor Relations Board, and we won that fight because it was an illegal firing. And all of this to say, our fight continues. About a year and a half ago, we did another walkout, and we've also done a lot of rallies and other work to expose what Amazon is doing, especially around both warehouses and data centers. And one story that I want to share is about a year and a half ago, we learned that Amazon was trying to kill a legislation in the Oregon state government. And what this legislation would have done is it would have required data centers in Oregon to be held to the same renewable energy standards as public utilities, because the data centers were using so much energy to the point that they were basically the size of utilities. And Amazon was trying to kill this bill. And we didn't learn about it until pretty far along in the process, until about a month before the vote was about to happen in the legislature. And part of the reason we didn't know about it is because Amazon hid the fact that they were trying to kill this bill, of course, right? Which is one of the speakers talked about earlier, where where Amazon and all these other tech companies often hide their involvement in data center deals until the last minute. And the only reason that we found out about it is because there were reporters and also organizations in Oregon, climate organizations in Oregon, who were obviously trying to get this bill passed. And they filed Freedom of Information Act requests to understand who was behind the lobbying that was happening to kill this bill. And surprise, surprise, it was Amazon. And so when we found out about this, we jumped into action, right? We organized some of our members to testify in support of the bill. We blasted out the news about this happening to employees, to our own membership, to employees. We worked our connections here in Seattle, and actually a local group of climate activists blocked an Amazon office, and specifically it was Andy Jassy's office building, blocked workers for an entire morning from entering the office, call attention to this issue. And we worked with the media to get the story out locally in Seattle, because as well as in national news coverage. And unfortunately, what ended up happening is that Amazon did kill the bill. It did not pass. And the sponsor of the bill, who wanted it to pass, said explicitly that it was because of Amazon that the bill was killed. And the reason that Amazon killed this bill is because they were planning on building 3 data centers in Oregon that would have been powered by natural gas. And they didn't want to be subject to these regulations. But actually, a few months after they killed the bill, and a couple months after the action where our comrades blocked the entrance to an Amazon building, and we had been doing a lot of education and agitation of the workforce around this issue of like, hey, Amazon publicly says that they're sustainable, but why is it killing this clean energy bill? Amazon actually then announced publicly that they were not going to power those data centers using using gas. And so unfortunately, even though the bill was ultimately killed, we were able to make Amazon concede. And we knew that because we knew the folks internally some of whom are on the sustainability team, some of whom are on the AWS infrastructure team. And some of them, they didn't even know that Amazon was trying to kill this bill. It was kept so secretive, even internally. And so the fact that we were able to expose this to the workers, to our coworkers, because we have access to internal channels of communication and our own channels of communication with other workers. That caused enough of a debate and questioning internally that Amazon did actually back off its plans to use gas to power these new data centers. And obviously, this is just one case in Oregon, right? And unfortunately, the bill didn't pass because we found out about it too late because Amazon was so secretive about it. But I share this story to say, you know, really what we can do about all of these issues that all these panelists have so clearly laid out is we need to look at where we have power and where we have leverage. And from my standpoint, with where we are, a lot of the power is in folks who work in the tech industry and also in community power. So I'll talk mostly about tech worker power and worker power, but I'll touch a little bit about community power as well. Yeah, as I think the same we've already won victories against Amazon because we've been able to organize workers, but it gets harder and harder. And the reason that it's getting harder and harder is because the tech companies and CEOs are cracking down more and more, and they're doing that because it works. And I think a lot of some of the myths that I have experienced in this work is, you know, we used to live in a world, or a lot of people think we used to live in a world where policy and decisions, and whether they're business decisions or policy decisions, were made based on the best available research or the most reasoned arguments. To whatever degree that we used to live in such a world, that doesn't exist anymore, right? We're not operating under an administration or an environment that even has that facsimile anymore. And so we need to change our tactics and our strategy. And what that means in my context is really about organizing workers and community to stand up in this time. We will win with leverage and we'll win with power. And that means acting collectively and not individually. Some of the challenges that we have seen in our organizing is, you know, often we'll meet people who are really concerned about these issues, right? And they think, well, I can't work at this company, right? It's against my morals, it's against my values. And what our work has been is partially like to help our principled coworkers decide to stay and fight. It's almost easy to say, like, I'm not going to be a part of this and I'm going to quit, but that's acting individually and not collectively. And that's also giving up possibly your biggest point of leverage. So I want to talk, so I'm speaking to all the tech workers who might be in the audience, whether you work at one of these tech companies, or maybe you know somebody who works at one of these tech companies. Your biggest point of leverage is your position as an employee. And tech CEOs have actually complained about the period of time between 2018 and 2020 when there were a lot of mass collective actions happening in the tech industry. And they were complaining about it because it's working. Mark Andreessen, who many of you know is one of the original Silicon Valley guys, one of the most connected guys in Silicon Valley. He was in the PayPal mafia along with Elon Musk. Mark Andreessen, he tells this absolutely hilarious story about how during this period, him and his fellow CEOs were under siege from 80% of their employees. And he says 10% of them explicitly joined their companies to destroy their companies from within because they were rabble-rousing about climate change and about equity and DEI. And I say it's hilarious. It's hilarious to me, and not to him. He doesn't think it's hilarious. It's hilarious to me because he talks about it in such apocalyptic terms that these CEOs were just poor CEOs were under attack. And because that's how he saw it, because that's real, because when workers work together to pressure to act collectively, these CEOs were forced to do things they didn't want to do. And I'll end here. I know I'm going to summarize real quick because we're way over time, but I just want to urge all the people who work in tech and on this call, look for the groups that are already organizing. That those are already exist. at your company, organizing at your company. It's great to work with community groups, and community groups have a lot of power as well. But if you work in tech, your biggest point of leverage is your position as a worker. So reach out to those organizations who are already organizing with your fellow coworkers. If you don't work in tech, I'm sure many of you know someone who works in tech. And I think they might just need you to ask them a tough question, to ask them, to have a hard conversation with them. Do you know what your company is doing? How are you working there? And how can you stomach working there, knowing these things, knowing the human rights abuses, knowing the environmental harms, knowing the community harms? How are you working there right now? And what are you doing about it? And that's a tough conversation to have, but those are hard conversations that we need to have right now. And sometimes it takes that kind of tough love from a loved one to open the door to new possibilities. So I'll pause there because we're way over time, but thank you everyone, and thank you to all the other panelists as well. And the way that we can make a difference on these issues is in conversation and in relationship with each other. So let's do it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. And thank you so much to everyone who has spoken today, who has come today to hear about this variety of perspectives. I love just how well everything segued. Like, this is just such a comprehensive, from like the chips to the workforce to the environmental impact. I think this has been a wonderful look at the organizing going around data centers, its impact on climate, and obviously the tech industry. And so thank you again for coming. This has been a joint event by Tech Workers Coalition, Bay Area, and Data and Society in advance of SF Climate Week. And so I wanted to plug that Tech Workers Coalition is a global organization. You can sign up to be a part of our Slack channel with the link that I'll drop in the chat. And that the Bay Area chapter and Data Society have another SF Climate Week event coming up later this week, next week. It'll be on the 26th in Oakland. It'll be a fireside chat that continues the conversation. And we will also have a presence at the May Day Parade, the May Day March here in San Francisco. So if you or someone you know would like to march with a Tech Workers for Labor contingent, please reach out. We'd love to have you be there and show up and show out, because tech workers are workers and it's time we stand up. So thank you so much. If you have any other questions, please drop them in the Q&A. And hopefully get an answer, and we'll try to keep the conversation going and have additional events, because this is just such an interesting topic and we've really appreciated all of your questions.